Welcome back, everyone. Jake here. Currently, we're on day 21 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and as I've stated in previous videos, Russia can no longer win this war. All they can do is kill more people and destroy more buildings, but that's not winning. Their primary military objective was to take the capital city of Kyiv, topple the government, and then install their own puppet pro-Russian government that the people of Ukraine would accept. That's never going to happen now. Every day that Russia stays in the country, they're going to continue losing more soldiers, losing more resources, and their own national security situation in the world is only going to get worse. Case in point, here's an article showing a poll conducted in Finland in which a majority of Finnish people now support joining NATO. Prior to today, Sweden and Finland were not members of NATO, but now it looks like they might potentially join. So if Russia's national security objective was to not have NATO countries on their border, if Finland joins, we now can start building NATO bases, basically 30 miles from St. Petersburg. How does this improve Russia's national security standing in the world? That's up to Russia. Similarly, all of these NATO countries, Germany especially, now want to increase their budgets, their military spending. Germany is going to start buying F-35 warplanes. Once again, if your objective as Russia was to not increase the size and the power of NATO, your invasion of Ukraine is having the opposite impact. Next update that I want to give you guys is that RT News has been shut down on most social media platforms. YouTube finally blocked all of their content. RT News stands for Russia Today. This is Kremlin paid for English-speaking propaganda. And their YouTube channel has been around for 15 years, and they had about 5 or 6 million subscribers. So this is a huge blow to Russia's propaganda platforms that they can no longer get their propaganda out to the English-speaking world on third-party websites. As of right now, RT.com has not been blocked for me in the United States, but as I visit it, guys, it's pretty much useless. Once again, to them, it's a limited special military operation. There is no war happening here. I think the breaking point for Google and YouTube was the bombing of that children's hospital in Mariupol. By the fact that RT News will not talk about it or cover it or show any of the war crimes that Russia is committing, by not reporting on it, in effect, they're spreading fake news. They're spreading misinformation. So RT News has been blocked. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. The Russian government is doing everything they can to isolate the Russian people, control the flow of information so that Russian people only get their information from Vladimir Putin, from the Kremlin. However, I don't know if you can stop it. Russia is too big of a country, and people in Russia have iPhones and, Samsung smartphones. So information is going to continue getting in. And as long as daily life in Russia can be disruptive, hopefully the Russian people will start questioning, is this just a special limited military operation, or is this a full-blown war happening in Ukraine? Here's an update on the territorial control of Ukraine, and keep in mind that Russia already controlled Crimea and the Donbas region. So in 3 weeks of fighting, all they've taken is this shaded red part. And this isn't a lot of territory for 3 weeks, guys. This wedge right here is maybe 15 miles from Cherniv to the Belarus border. Once again, only about 30 miles. And when you look at the documented equipment losses by Russia since the start of the war, they've lost over 400 vehicles, over 200 tanks, 29 surface-to-air missiles. This was last updated 2 days ago on the 14th, with every passing day as more and more NATO supplies flow into the country to resupply the Ukrainian forces. Russia's material losses are just going to keep growing substantially. Additionally, there's just lots and lots of bizarre videos. Russia has successfully taken certain villages, but only when there was no fighting, when there was no resistance. But as soon as Ukrainian forces show up, the Russian conscripts, they just abandon the town. They just abandon their vehicles. And in this video clip, you can see 8 or 9 Russian vehicles that have just been completely abandoned. Perhaps they ran out of fuel or these vehicles broke down. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's very easy to take a small village when there's no resistance. But as soon as Ukrainian forces show up and start fighting them, a lot of these Russian soldiers who are conscripts being forced to fight, they just abandon their vehicles, they abandon their equipment and run away. And a possible explanation for this is that Russian logistics are so bad, its military is begging China for MREs. A lot of these Russian soldiers who have surrendered and are now POWs have explained how dire the situation is on the ground for Russian forces. So this is incredibly embarrassing and incredibly pathetic for the Russian military that they didn't bring enough food for a multi-week war. And they're so desperate, they're trying to get Chinese military MREs sent to their frontline forces in Ukraine. Here's an article titled, "Russia Facing Outright Defeat and Sudden Collapse in Ukraine," according to this political scientist. And it says in this article, and I believe this, that Russian soldiers were evidently carrying their dress uniforms for their victory parade they were going to hold in Kyiv rather than extra ammo and rations. So this war, all the way at the top, from Vladimir Putin down, everybody in the Russian military assumed they would be greeted as liberators, that this war wouldn't take more than a week's tops. So Russian leadership ordered ground forces to pack and bring their fancy dress uniforms so that they could have a victory parade in Kyiv. That alone shows you that they obviously were not planning for a multi-week war, multi-month war, and they did not bring enough ammo and rations to supply and feed their own troops. And on the Ukrainian side, morale is only increasing as they get resupplied from the West, and more of these Western freedom fighters come to fight for Ukraine. I want to show you this video of a Belgian that has chosen to go to Ukraine and fight. He has medic experience.
My name is Tristan. I'm from Belgium. I'm a student master in psychology. I have 2 years experience in rescue and first aid. I came to join the Ukrainian Army for freedom in Europe. If we can enjoy everything we enjoy today is because people like us have gone up and fought against dictators in the past.
So obviously this is pro-Ukrainian propaganda, and when you have English speakers getting out your message, you're going to reach a wider audience in the world. But where is the Russian counter to this? Where are the videos of Russian soldiers encouraging people to come join their side to fight for Russia? Obviously, those videos don't exist, as none of these Russian soldiers or these Russian conscripts are allowed to have their phones, allowed to have access to the internet, allowed to collect information about what is happening in the war. If you had to choose between two sides, and one got the use of their cell phones and the internet, and the other didn't, and communication was extremely limited and hampered, who do you think over a long period of time would have the military advantage? Another thing that is just unbelievable to me, but 3 prime ministers from the leaders from Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovenia, they traveled to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky. Obviously, they can't fly because the skies aren't safe, but they took the train. So NATO members, the heads of state of these NATO countries, are traveling to an active war zone to show their support for the Ukrainian people and their support for President Zelensky. This is pretty incredible. And every day, President Zelensky is pumping out video after video to give his people guidance, hope, and encouragement. Here is an unbelievable video of him walking through the streets of Kyiv. Once again, this is an active war zone, and he's choosing to go to a hospital to visit wounded Ukrainian soldiers. Let me just show you a little bit of this clip.
Академік військов, генеральної реєстрації Лурін.
Ми переможемо. 100%. Добрий день, бажаю здоров'я. Як ви, хлопці?
This has to be incredibly inspiring to the Ukrainian people to see their leader not afraid to leave his bunker and to walk through the streets, visit wounded soldiers in the hospital. But I want to point out how bad is Russian intelligence that they can't get this guy. I don't want them to get this guy. Obviously, I'm supportive, and that would be a terrible, tragic loss for the Ukrainian people. But I want to highlight how bad is Russian intelligence if they don't have spies or operatives in Kyiv that know where this guy is going to be. Potentially, they could take him out with an assassination attempt or a cruise missile. But Russia is just basically embarrassing itself when this guy can freely walk through the streets and visit hospitals and they can't get to him. Okay guys, now the next couple clips might be controversial to play because I'm going to be showing you Russian POWs. Generally, confessions given by prisoners of war, you shouldn't take them serious because you can never know if that POW is being tortured or coerced or threatened or forced in any way to make this statement. However, I'm choosing to use my own eyes and ears and logic, and I'm listening to these Russian POWs, and their stories are all very similar in that they feel like they were lied to by their leadership, they were tricked into this war, they don't want to fight, and they just surrender because they don't want to participate in this war. Let's watch this first clip of a Russian conscript who surrendered himself.
I am Vladislav Likhovidov. I was born in the city of Volgograd in Russia. There was 3 of us when the unit had not yet been formed. Initially, we were supposed to go to the Cape Opuk in the Crimea. On that day, we learned that we were going to the war, and we really did not want to participate in it, so we fled. We were under fire in the city at first. We got out of our BMP the second time. Our unit went to the BMP too. We found out what was really going on. A helicopter came out and fired at us. After that, part of our unit deserted, and we spent the night in the forest and went to the locals to surrender in the morning. As for the...
So this is a Russian conscript who was tricked into a war zone. As soon as he realized that he was in a war zone, he fled his vehicle, he ran off into the woods. In the morning, he found local villagers and surrendered himself. He chose to be a prisoner of war instead of fighting for the Russians. Let's fast forward to the end here.
I still do not understand why this war is happening. I don't see the point in it completely. For the sake of what? Territory? It makes no sense. We simply lost most of the young population, the economy has been killed, everyone considers Russia as an enemy. Many more people in Ukraine suffered, many children too. I think that the one who gave the order to start this war is already a freak, an old moronic. Those who are going to come here, it makes no sense for them to appear here at all. I went to the military service, roughly speaking. Because of this, just in 1 month, I took part in hostilities, became a war criminal and a prisoner of war. And I hardly think that we will be exchanged if even the corpses of Russian soldiers are not taken away. Most likely, I will stay here for a long time.
So this Russian conscript who surrendered himself has no expectations that the Russian government is even going to try and get him back. And he's making the argument that if Russia doesn't even care about the soldiers choosing to fight or the war dead, they're being left in the field, why would they care about their own POWs? And I think this actually is freaking out these Russian soldiers the most, is there are all these reports that Russian leadership, rather than treating their wounded, are just executing them, and that Russian soldiers who have fallen in battle, their bodies are not being taken care of, they're not being sent back home to their families. All the wounded and all of the dead that Russia is incurring from this war, they're being sent to Belarus. The reason why is they don't want the truth getting out to the Russian people, so any wounded or dead that they do reclaim from the fields, they're just sending back to Belarus. But there's also reports of mobile crematoriums, and Russia is just destroying all the evidence of their casualties. Here's the next POW video I want to share with you guys. Let's just watch a minute of this.
We were sent to be slaughtered. We decided to surrender because when we first entered Mariupol, we realized that we were not in a place we had been promised to be. We were told that we should protect the humanitarian corridor and not to shoot people. We were being thrown into all this and we didn't sign up for it. We have been thrown into this that we did not sign up for. That's why we immediately gave up. We didn't shoot. When they took us and checked our weapons, they saw we had not shot.
So these two Russian soldiers, as soon as they realized that their leadership tricked them into a war zone, they instantly surrendered. When they surrendered to Ukrainian forces, they checked their guns. They realized these guns have never even been fired. These two Russian soldiers were unwilling to even fire their guns once. Do these men look like they've been tortured or coerced or forced to give this confession? Once again, it is a little uncomfortable to take in information from POWs, but they're drinking tea and they look like they're being treated pretty well by the Ukrainian forces. The next clip I want to show you is actually of a Russian bomber pilot, and he's not a conscript. If you're flying a plane, you're an officer, and you chose to be there. You're basically a career military man in the Russian forces at that point. So this clip is about 1 minute long. Let's watch it.
Third combat flight has been carried out by me on 11th of March 2022. On board there were 4 tons of high explosive aviation bombs. After we received coordinates, during the execution of the combat operation, I have understood that the target of a combat operation was not military infrastructure of the enemy, but residential buildings. Despite this, I have executed the criminal order. After a bombing, I have been shot down by anti-air systems of Ukraine. After the touchdown, I was taken prisoner by servicemen of Ukrainian National Guard. I understood and confessed to the terrible crimes committed by me. I want to ask for forgiveness of all Ukrainian people and God for all the misfortune that we have brought to them. I promise full commitment to bring about the end to this war as soon as possible, and to bring all those guilty in the genocide of Ukrainian people. I also wish to address all servicemen of Russian Federation Armed Forces, to members of my platoon. Immediately cease the execution of criminal orders. Immediately cease all combat operations. Immediately cease the bombing of peaceful cities. It is my opinion that we have already lost this war.
So this is a Russian officer. This is a Russian pilot giving a press conference admitting to war crimes, admitting that he was ordered to drop bombs on this location. He was probably lied to and told this was a military target. He realized this was a civilian center and that he bombed a civilian target. It's part of their terror campaign they're currently conducting. He was then shot down and captured and immediately confessed to the crime, and he feels guilty. He feels guilty, and he's giving this press conference hoping that his words and his message can get back to his unit, once again encouraging his fellow pilots to stop carrying out these missions. Additionally, guys, this is really messed up, but there are reports that these Russian pilots getting shot down are ejecting from their planes and their parachutes are not opening. So there's video clips of, once again, Russian pilots ejecting from aircraft after being hit, and there are parachute malfunctions. Russia's military is so incompetent, they can't even pack a parachute correctly to protect their pilots. So if you're a Russian pilot and if you're taking off from a base in Russia, maybe you still have cell phone and internet access. So you're being lied to by your leadership and ordered to commit war crimes by bombing, civilian targets in an active war zone in which it's likely you're going to be shot down by NATO anti-defense systems, and your own parachute likely won't deploy because your military is just so incompetent. So this brings us back to China, and what is the likelihood that China will help Russia with their war in Ukraine? It's being widely reported now that Russia is asking China for military equipment and military supplies as their own reserves are becoming depleted. And to China's credit so far, they're indicating that they want to steer clear of US sanctions over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China itself has not sanctioned Russia. They have stated their own, in effect, neutrality, and they don't want to basically interrupt their own economic activity or trade with Russia. But to directly help Russia with military aid so that will be used in Ukraine, I think this is giving China pause and hesitation. China is not a party to the crisis, nor does it want the sanctions to affect China, according to their foreign minister, Wang Yi. He said on Monday with a call with his Spanish counterpart. So let's now, once again, war game this and think about what does China actually want from all of this? And China and Russia currently are geopolitical allies to a certain extent in that they want to form this counterbalance to the United States and NATO. They have a mutual interest in seeing maybe NATO weakened or the power and prestige of the United States in the world diminished. However, as I've stated in a previous video, Russia and China have their own historical disputes, their own historical beef, and they do currently vie for influence over the Central Asian plateau. So currently, Russia from Moscow dominates these countries in Central Asia politically and to a certain extent militarily. And if Russia were to decline in power and influence because of an economic collapse, that would open a door for China to become more involved in basically greasing the palms of politicians in these countries, having more power and influence over their neighbors. But I don't think China wants an outright collapse of the Putin regime. So let's assume there's a best case scenario for NATO and the United States, and that Vladimir Putin is killed by his own generals, and then the Russian military stands down and welcomes in basically Western peacekeepers or Western political actors to reconstitute and rebuild Russia. Basically just take their constitution and retool it so that an authoritarian can't take control again. What if, this is a big what if, guys, not likely, but what if Russia actually becomes a thriving capitalist democracy? What would China think about that? Let's say, once again, best case scenario for Western Europe, Moscow has true political reforms, they become a democracy, they embrace free market capitalism, they no longer tolerate human rights abuses. Potentially even, let's say 10 years from now, Russia even joins NATO. How do you feel the Chinese, which is a authoritarian communist regime, how do you think China would react to Russia being part of the EU or being part of NATO 10 years from now? I don't think China long-term supports that. China doesn't want that. They would then be the lone no vote on the UN Security Council for a lot of votes. So I think to a certain extent, China will give aid to Russia to keep the Putin regime from collapsing. I think they want to weaken Russia. They don't want Russia to be as powerful as they are today. But they're going to do just enough to keep Russia basically as an authoritarian regime. It's the same game plan they have with North Korea. If China stopped supplying and supporting the Kim regime in North Korea, this country would collapse and the South Koreans would move in order to rebuild the country, unify it as one. But if North and South Korea were to unify, the United States would just immediately start building military bases on the border with China. So the only reason why North Korea, as pathetic as it is, the only reason why North Korea exists is because China does the bare minimum to keep it going. And I think that they would happily create the same arrangements with Russia and Moscow, giving them just enough to keep the Putin regime from completely collapsing, or potentially another authoritarian to succeed or replace Moscow. But what they don't want is a thriving, democratic, capitalist nation that would then be basically on their border over here in outer Manchuria. Okay guys, that's all the information I have for this update video. If you found it informative, give me a thumbs up to help out with the algorithm. I greatly appreciate it. Until the next video, take care, be safe.